You're listening to the 40 Fit Radio podcast, dedicated to the 40-plus community. Join us as we discuss the truth about fitness and health using science, reason, and the experiences of our host and content experts. Welcome to the 40 Fit Nation. Hey, welcome back to 40 Fit Radio and welcome back to the 40 Fit Nation. I'm your host, Coach D, and my co-host, Coach Trent.
That's me.
We are here in the studio today, live from Fort Worth, Dallas, Texas, and we are going to talk about, let's just call it the coddling of COVID-19. And we're going to talk a little bit about the thought lines regarding the coddling of the American mind. It's a book that was written by two authors. We'll talk a little bit specifically about the book because I've been reading the book and it's an older book. And we're also just talking about some principles that Trent and I have been talking about just offline. And we just wanted to share this stuff with our audience because even though we see a pervasive change in how the youth of America and really the youth of the world, but specifically the youth of America are being taught and how they're being raised, we're also starting to see some of the coddling culture become more pervasive throughout our population, whether it comes through social media, comes through mainstream media, in the things that we read and the things that we see on newscast and also in mainstream TV.
Yeah.
And so we're going to talk about the coddling mind and the weak mind versus the strong mind. And that's one of the things we just want to just sit and breeze about and talk about and go into a couple of rabbit holes and try not to be too depressing over it all. Because it's not depressive, but it's something that we have to recognize exists.
So first of all, you said this was a youth thing. I disagree there.
Yeah.
I think it affects all
human
generations, all generations of our society. And second of all, just to get this out of the way, by the way, millennials are in our 30s now. So when you're talking about youth, it's not millennials anymore.
Right.
It's stunning that that's still like the catch-all term for young people. It's like, guys, like, no, millennials right now have kids and a mortgage.
What is the new generation called? What's
Z?
Yeah, I don't know.
So that'd be like your youngest daughter, right? She's 22. 22? Yeah, so she'd be Gen Z, I think is what they call it.
And my oldest will be 29 this year.
Yeah.
So
she would be the youngest.
Edge of millennials?
Yeah, she would be on the younger end of the millennials. I think the youngest millennials are like 27.
25-year-old, so she's a Zer?
She's a Zer.
Whatever that is?
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, I just want to get that out of the way because everybody's like, the millennials.
Yeah, well,
the millennials.
No, I don't even go down that roads because I've got a guy that works for me out on our ranch. He's 22 years old and he doesn't think like an old guy or a young guy or a millennial or anything else. He's a hard-working, very logically based individual that believes that he gets what he works for and that hard is good and that it yields a good result and all the good things in life are hard sometimes. And that's a great just general thought line to have as an individual. It rests that responsibility solely on ourselves.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've preached for, I hate to use the term preached, but we are from the South. But one of the things I have, kind of always said, I mean, within 40 Fit and 40 Fit Radio specifically, is that this is all about self-governance. Your health and your wellness and your fitness is all your responsibility.
Right.
Period.
Yep.
It's no one else but yours.
Yeah.
If you own a car and it's your car and you hold the title to it, the well-being of that car is solely on your head. It's solely in your hands.
And it has to be because you know this as well as I do. If you've ever tried to coach somebody to change their habits, you realize that you can only externally motivate somebody for like a couple weeks maybe.
Yeah.
And if they're not willing,
it crushes your spirit.
And if they're not willing to do it, if they're not internally motivated, if they don't take responsibility for their health themselves, it will never happen. You can't do it. It's like, beating a horse with a club. It just
no, it just crushes you.
Yeah.
It's extremely frustrating and yields very poor results. In the short term, you might get somewhere, but in the long term, you just bang your head against the wall about 1,000 times. And so, I told someone last night, I had gentleman that came and trained with me last night, who's one of our staff members at one of our clinics, and he's a DPT, he's a doctor of physical therapy. And I said, I would much rather have the individual that just comes in and works hard on a regular basis and is not a showstopper, is not a high performance individual, but they just put in the work on a regular basis, day in, day out, and they don't gripe about it and they don't whine about it. I'd much rather have that individual that's someone who comes in is very inconsistent, yet they have a lot more potential.
Yeah.
It just crushes you, man.
Yeah, that's part of why we like strength training, is because
it's hard.
It also really rewards the consistent more than other pursuits even.
Yeah, I think I think the way to put it might be like this. Some people that are genetically gifted for a particular skill set or craft or expertise, whatever you want to call it, because they're so genetically gifted, if they're not given the right tutoring and the right training along the way in their giftedness, they never learn the skill set of habits that are required to stabilize and maximize that gift over the long term.
Right.
Fitness is very similar to that.
Yes.
If you look at athletic prowess, individuals that are very athletically gifted aren't necessarily the best athletes.
Right.
Because they don't develop sometimes the habits that need to be created that are the foundational pillars of athletic development over the long haul, over the long term.
Right.
And they crash and burn all the time.
Yeah,
They crash and burn.
They inevitably rise to the level of, it's kind of like the Peter principle in the office, office politics. Like, you rise to the level of your incompetence. They rise to the level of their where the rest of the playing field now equals their ability. But those that have acquired a foundational system of habits and a logical training program and all these things, right? A wide set of skills and a mentality as well. Those people have more room to go up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And will eventually exceed those. And whereas the raw talent that never developed himself outside of that, he's hit the ceiling.
Yeah.
That's it, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, it might take him years to get beyond that because he had never developed those things, right?
Right. So Trent and I offline have kind of been talking about just the whole COVID-19 thing, and obviously we recognize, and I recognize probably more than most individuals because of what I do, because I'm a healthcare giver, and I see it every day in my practices. But we recognize that this particular coronavirus is a bad thing, and it has the potential to infect individuals and make them very, very sick. And some individuals, unfortunately, fall prey to this virus and they die from it. And I think that that's something that is, I'm going to say something very carefully without seeming callous, because I don't mean it this way, but I do think that that's something that's part of life and death. And that's something that happens in our culture. People get sick and they die. Now, that doesn't mean that we should inadvertently, purposely expose someone to something that we know they can't handle. And I think we've handled the pandemic, whatever you want to call it, and I'm just one opinion, but I think we've handled it incorrectly in how we've handled it as a nation. I think we've had a kind of a reverse isolation type modeling with the entire culture, and we should have been doing that with a very specific portion of our culture. And in some states, we even overexposed that portion of the culture, specifically in New York and within the nursing home industry. We purposefully or inadvertently, whatever happened with that leadership, they exposed individuals who were the highest risk to more individuals who were already infected.
Right.
It was totally opposite of what they should have been doing in regards to virology and understanding the whole concept of herd immunity and how you really fight against really bad bugs in a culture that's trying to survive. And so we could go down a whole science hole of talking about what we should have done, what we shouldn't have done. But what I really wanted to talk about today, that Trent and I have been talking about just philosophically, and that's why it's opinion-based, is, having a strong mind during this time and not having a coddled mind. And so I've been I've been reading the book, The Coddling of the American Mind by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt. And that was written in 2014. And when I say I've been reading it, I've actually been listening to it on the way back and forth to the ranch on audio, whatever it's called.
Audiobook?
Yeah,
Audible?
audiobook,
Yeah.
Audible, whatever it
Nice.
is. Because that's an easy way for me to digest a lot of information quickly.
Yeah.
And so just a great book, though. I mean, there are some areas that I don't necessarily agree directly with, but a great book. But what the book basically talks about is how good intentions and bad ideas are setting up a generation for failure. And they specifically target this book towards the young in our culture that are in academic settings, whether they be in primary school, secondary school, or college, or the academic university setting. But they talk about these three great untruths that are being taught to the culture. But I would agree with you, Trent, in the sense that I would basically say, I believe these three great untruths are being taught to the populace. We see it in our media. We see it in our social media setting online. We see it on TV in the way that males and females and people are portrayed in our American culture. And we see it pervasively throughout our society in little subtle ways.
Yeah, I think the baby boomer generation was the first generation that was exposed to mass amounts of television and mass media. And this is really interesting. If you look at you can go look up, I can't remember what the number is off the top of my head, but you can go look up. There have been some studies done on how many advertisements the average person sees in the US. Like if you live in an urban area, you see, if you watch TV, you see advertisements on TV, you see billboards, you see, posters in the store, you see the advertisements within the store, for the store. It just goes on and on and on. It's constant. It's a constant barrage of marketers poking at your brain, trying to get you to buy their thing. And the baby boomer generation was the first generation that was exposed to this mass media. It was a sort of a new science at the time,
right?
Trying to figure out how to make people buy more stuff,
right?
And I think that for some of that generation, even though they may not have been raised in an educational system which valued feelings over data and logic, they have been exposed to decades of television and popular media, which has had the goal of trying to change their mindset or think for them, to instill in them a certain set of beliefs and emotional appeal that has eroded their educational basis, right? In other words, if you allow someone else to think for you, then you no longer have your own thoughts.
Well, yeah, that's obvious. And it has eroded their sense of self-preservation and their primal instinct for self-governance and self-preservation.
Yeah. And it's only accelerated through the generations. And now we're facing a situation where the educational system has now morphed to accommodate this sort of way of looking at things. And
that's why they address it in that sense, is that the younger generation has been promoted probably since around the 1980s to some of these thought lines.
Right.
So basically, Lukianoff and Haidt talk about three great untruths that have been taught to mostly college students born around 1995 or later, that these are three great untruths that are being taught. But let's just forget that this book is about the youth.
Right.
Let's just say I believe this book is about all people.
Yeah.
I think there are some people, based on the way they were raised and the environment that they were raised, whether it be in a rural setting or a very cause and effect setting, a very hard setting. Like we believe within barbell training, simple, hard, and effective works. That's why we don't sex up fitness. That's why we don't sex up health, because it doesn't work like that. If you look at a lot of these, things that people sell, they last about a quarter, if that, or half a year in their prevalence and in their popularity, and then they're gone, and they never really impact your long-term health. And so good basic truths about fitness and health work. And we've talked about some of those foundational principles early in our podcast. The first 10 podcasts were about the foundational truths, the first principles, the pillars of fitness and health that we talk about. But Haidt and Lukianoff talk about three great untruths. The first untruth is the untruth of fragility, which basically says what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. That's the first great untruth. The second great untruth is the untruth of emotional reasoning. Always trust your feelings. And that's the second untruth. The third untruth is the us versus them untruth, which says life is a battle always between good and evil people. And so they talk about how these three great untruths have led the human psyche into a posture or a thinking mode of ensuring that these three great untruths become their first principles. And now they operate totally different within our culture than they genetically and naturally should be based on natural law. And if you believe in spirituality, based on spiritual law, because those are three untruths that are definitely not true when it comes to the human species.
Right.
They're definitely not true. Anyone who knows anything about human real life knows those are untrue. So let's talk about the first one. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. We've said forever in barbell training and what we do with our clients, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Not because it's some philosophical mindset, even though it does have some, there are some philosophical truths to that, but more importantly, because it has a biological underpinning of science and reason.
Right.
And that is this: when you take an organism and you put them under stress, if it doesn't kill that organism or permanently damage that organism becomes stronger.
That's right.
And that's based on pure science and reason and the adaptation modeling, the stress recovery adaptation modeling.
Yeah.
Organisms that go under stress in any part of their organ system, and they're able to self-recover or with the assistance of their environment, recover through that. They adapt.
Right.
And when they adapt, they rise in the food chain.
Yeah.
They get stronger, not weaker. But if you look at how we're handling this virus among our culture, we have this pervasive coddling of the American mind. And what this causes is it causes individuals to jump to a position of safetyism. And safetyism is basically this principle, this term that basically says at all cost, we should be safe first. That is the number one goal, is to be safe.
Right.
But human life is not built on safety.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of an illusion, right? Like we've built up this civilization that distances us or abstracts us from what you were talking about, natural law, right? Just nature, right? And nature, there are predators, right? Now we are an apex predator.
Right.
So we are kind of at the top of the food chain, but there are things that could still eat us in nature, right?
Yeah.
If
we don't outthink them.
If we don't outthink them.
Because we can't out-physicality many of them.
Right.
You can't out-physicality a tiger usually.
Generally not.
Yeah.
There are other forces that are much greater than us, like, storms, natural disasters, right? Those can take us down.
Right.
And so we've built up in our civilization sort of this abstraction from those events. They still occur, but they're sort of secondary to our existence.
We have modern conveniences. We have artificial light. We have artificial air that we pump in. We have artificial temperature environment. We have an artificial environment. And when you live in an artificial environment every single day of your life and you don't ever get out into the world around you and experience how hard life really is.
Right.
We have all these modern conveniences that have led us to a coddled mind, a weak mind.
Yeah, so we're just kind of generally divorced from how nature operates without the trappings of society.
Right.
Now, I have watched something interesting happen in the development of the COVID crisis. When we were talking about this in late February, early March, I guess it was early March, before the quarantine happened across the country, the rhetoric was, okay, we don't know what this is yet. It might be the big one. This might be the Black Death, right? Okay, so let's lock down for a little bit. Let's figure out what we've got here. Let's figure out if this is a really big deal or not. And then the logic was, well, let's flatten the curve, right? We all heard that. Let's just spread out the infection rate,
the death and the infection rate,
so that we wouldn't overwhelm the healthcare systems.
Right.
Okay, I bought that. Okay, sure.
Yeah, I think we all did.
That's reasonable. I actually think for the most part, the population reasonably responded to that. Like, okay, yeah, we can lock down for a little bit. We understand. We don't want to overrun all of our hospitals and then have people die needlessly.
Right.
Well, we watched New York, which we all knew would be the worst spot.
Cluster,
because there's 8 million plus people there.
A very small surface area.
We watched that healthcare system buckle, but not break.
Right.
They did not
break.
break.
In the worst place of our country.
In the worst place. And then after that, after they started coming out to the other side, right? And I know they're still dealing with lots of issues there, but as they started to emerge on the other side of the hump, if you will, the rhetoric in the media started changing. Now it's, well, we've got to lock down. We got to continue locking down because we want to minimize the number of deaths. We want to prevent people from getting this.
Right.
Is more or less what the media was saying, right? And now it's like, well, we might have to be locked down through the rest of the summer, through the rest of the year, maybe.
Right.
And I was like, hold on a second. We just moved the goalpost. Originally, we were saying, let's flatten the curve. And we watched the worst area get through it. And we're like, okay, it can be done. Okay, they locked down for a little while and they managed to get through it. Other spots in the U.S. are going to be marginally better to much better because of the population density and all these, all that kind of stuff. And that's one of those that's one of those weaknesses of the mind that I think you're pointing to, is that we have allowed ourselves to be divorced gradually from the position of logic that we started to a position of emotional reasoning, which was safetyism. Like, oh, we don't want anybody to die. We don't want grandma to die.
Right.
And so we can't give it to anybody. We can't go anywhere.
Right. And by having that philosophy of safetyism, it leads to everything from microaggression to the call-out culture to intersectionality. Just read up on all those things. I mean, it has led us to a model of living for a lot of Americans to where safety rules the day. And the reality is, folks, I hate to tell you this, and this includes your fitness and health.
Yeah.
Your body doesn't get stronger, and you don't have a more vibrant, strong, youthful body being in a position of safetyism.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't also mean, if you hear that in my voice, I'm not saying go out and do something stupid.
Right.
I'm saying use logic and reason. And like Trent and I have talked about on several podcasts, and it's the thing I use in my practice, and that is exposure without danger.
Right.
When I get people that come into my practice, I had a young lady that came into my practice recently. She fractured her left pelvis. She broke her right wrist. She had multiple leg fractures, lots of surgeries. She flipped a four-wheeler upside down.
I was going to say
it
car
landed
crash.
on her.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I have to, every day when she comes in, make her do things that she now realizes that it's working, that she's doing better. She's gone from a walker to a cane to crutches, or to a crutches to a cane to nothing now. And but now she gets it, and she's a hard worker anyway. She was a power lifter before this.
Oh, okay.
In high school. Yeah. High school, I guess. But we've had to do some things with her that hurt. Yeah. They're not fun. They're not fun, folks. And what I'm really saying to our audience today is that, because we're talking to mostly people over the age of 40 in our audience. I mean, that's kind of what we target. But what I'm really saying, guys, is that you are not going to safety your way around this thing. It's not if, it's when you're going to get this thing potentially. Now, I always tell people that come out to my ranch sometime when they want to ride horses, and they'll ask me, hey, am I going to get bucked off? I mean, is there a chance that I might get bucked off? And I say, see that sign? That's a state of Texas sign that says this is a dangerous event. You could die.
Yeah.
Now sign this waiver.
Right.
Because I want to put the fear of God in them. I mean, why? Because it's not a matter of if, it's when.
Right.
If you ride enough times, at some point you're going to get bucked off of a horse.
Yeah.
Now, we want to control that environment as best possible, but there is some exposure to risk there.
Yeah.
And so what I would say to people about COVID-19 is basically this. If you are young and you are healthy and you take care of your health and you use good personal hygiene and you do everything in your power to reasonably and logically reduce your chance of being exposed and contracting COVID-19, and you get it, so be it. Fight your way through it.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, we're talking about all these vaccines and other things that are coming around, and, I wonder if the U.S. government will require mandatory vaccination on this thing. That's a scary proposition, too. And I'm not an anti-vaxxer. All my kids had vaccines growing up. I had vaccines. But I'm wondering if they're going to mandate that we all get the vaccine to this thing. But let's just say it this way. There are some individuals in our culture that we have to take a mode more representing or more similar to safetyism with them, because they have become a human organism over time that has become too weakened to fight on their own well-being without assistance. Someone who is 85 years old, has COPD, is on 4 liters of oxygen, and has brittle diabetes needs our help. That person may be better off getting a vaccine and potentially not contracting this disease to maintain their quality of life and their length of life versus fighting through this thing. But I will say this, if they do get it and they do fight through this thing and they come out on the other side, they will hopefully eventually be stronger.
Right.
And so I think that what we have to do really careful, guys, is we have to not have a coddled mind through this. We need a strong mindset. We need a reasoning mindset. And that leads us to point 2, but you want to say something.
Yeah. There's this idea behind all of this, behind safetyism, right? That there's something on the, like, that we're all kind of waiting for this thing to pick us up out of the crisis and put us out of the zone of danger, right?
Yeah.
There's this belief, it's kind of like the Deus Ex Machine kind of concept, right? Where you have some higher power grabs you and pulls you out of the unwinnable situation, right? And that's the way the vaccines are kind of, it's kind of like, there's this vaccine, it's the hope, right? It's this blind hope in the future, like, vaccine. Well, first of all, I don't know that there will be a vaccine.
Right.
I mean, we have the influenza every year, multiple strains of it. How many strains do we typically have a vaccine for?
Right.
And a lot of times the vaccine doesn't work.
Right.
But it's usually never for all of the strains of influenza out there, right? So vaccines are not, like, we may not get one if one is developed. It may not cover, if there are multiple strains of this, it may not cover it. So placing your hope in someone else to pick you up and save you from the crisis is not, that's not a good way to go.
Well, I would say that the majority of individuals should be relying on themselves.
Right. Good
data, knowledge, safe practices, and getting strong and getting healthy.
Yeah. There's also another concept here that, and I don't know if I'm making any sense, but there's another concept here that you and I know because we've been involved in finance in different ways. I used to work in corporate finance and, underwriting and that kind of thing. And one of the things that's very obvious to everyone who's in finance, this is just the fundamental of the business,
right,
is that there is always risk.
Yeah.
Risk can be transferred, risk can be mitigated or put onto someone else, but it's almost like that conservation of energy concept
It's neither
in
created
physics,
nor
right?
destroyed.
Like the risk exists,
right,
and you can't get rid of it.
Right.
You can mitigate it by kind of transferring it to other areas, and you can
control it.
You can control it, or at least not take on excessive risk.
Right.
But it always exists.
Well,
if I live a healthy lifestyle, in order to do that, I still have to get on the highway.
Right.
Every day.
Right.
When I go to work.
There's a certain amount of risk. I would say it this way. Several years back, I did a accelerated free fall parachuting, not tandem, anything else. It was on my own.
Yeah.
Went through jump school, and then I had a jump master that jumped with me and one that filmed it. But I was pretty much, I jumped out of the airplane. He jumped out after me and then grabbed the handle on my suit, but I'm doing an accelerated free fall on my own.
Right.
I'm not attached to anyone, okay?
Yeah.
Which I loved. I love the idea that I'm doing this on my own, kind of.
Yeah.
Okay. But I went through jump school. I went through 8 hours of training, and then I practiced, and then I didn't get to jump that day because the weather was not conducive, so I had to come back, and then I didn't get to jump that day, so the weather wasn't conducive, so I had 3 other times to practice. But there's a lot of risk with that. I'm jumping out of the aircraft, but I'm jumping out of the aircraft with calculated risk. I have a parachute that I'm relying on. I have a jump master that I'm relying on. I'm also relying on my training. So an ideology of safetyism says don't ever jump. Don't ever get in the airplane.
Right.
Don't even be around people that talk about that.
Yeah.
And not only that, but call them out in our culture as risky people and as bad people.
Yeah.
And as
condemn them.
Yes, exactly. And that they're aggressing against you physically because they do that and that's their sport or that's their hobby. So that's one thing I want to say. The second thing is this, and you talked about finances. Hey guys, here's the key. If you get this thing, you better hope you have banked some fitness and health.
Yeah.
You better have a good diet. You better be strong, and you better take care of yourself because that's your only sense of self-preservation against this bug.
That's right. Yeah.
Where we see our population really struggling with this, the large majority, over 75% of the individuals are over the age of 75 to 80. Why? They have a naturally lower immune system, a naturally lower health bank. Those that are really healthy at that age have done actually fairly well.
Yeah.
But those that are really unhealthy, even at 50 or 60, have not done well with this. And again, we want to dispel that myth that the untruth of fragility. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, folks. And you've got to start changing that way of thinking and recognizing. And I know we're preaching to the choir here,
Yeah.
but that's the first untruth.
Yeah.
The second untruth, it leads us to this, the untruth of emotional reasoning. In other words, always trust your feelings. Guys, if you're trusting your feelings through this trial, through this COVID-19, you're going to be all over the board.
Right.
You're going to be so up and down every single day because the media and social media wants to manipulate your thought.
Right. Yeah. That's the first thing I think about is like, where are your feelings coming from? Like, so the idea that trusting your intuition or your feelings is valid is predicated on your feelings coming from you or coming from this authority that is better or that has a higher moral standing than logic.
Right.
Okay, so if you are an infallible being, then your intuition would be perfectly good.
Right.
It'd be perfect, but we're not.
We're generally intuitively wrong.
And as I said, like I believe that if you have not actively developed your mind and your intuition and your reasoning outside of the forces of other people who want to control your mind, then your feelings aren't coming from you anyway. They were shaped and molded from people, from outside forces that have other agendas than your health and
well, I was
well-being.
talking to someone the other day, and it was actually a family member, and where I was talking about their balance, and they've noticed a change and a deterioration in their balance over the years, especially like in the last 2 or 3 years. And so I said, you know how we treat this? And the person said, no, how do you treat this? I said, I make you unbalanced.
All right.
I make you get into a position where you feel unstable and unsafe. But I expose you to that without danger.
Right.
Because we use a model that allows you to be in that environment, in that situation of imbalance and lack of stability, but with protection around you. But we have to expose you to that to allow the neural centers of your brain, the coordination and balance centers of your brain, and the peripheral proprioceptors and all the organs that help you balance. We have to stimulate those because what happens over time is basically this. And this is a perfect example of that model of fragility and emotional reasoning and not using logic. Over time, people begin to feel less balance.
Yeah.
And so they begin to do less things that require that balance.
Right.
And they begin to do less and less and less. Before long, they're like those people in that movie WALL-E, where they're laying on the rafts and they're in about 12 inches of water and they have no idea that they can stand up. They're laying on the rafts.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, one of them stands up in the water and says, I can stand. Look, I can stand.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I can stand. Well, they could all stand all along.
Yeah.
They just bought into the lie that it just didn't feel safe and it just didn't feel right. And so what I told this person was, we have to make you do exercise activities to retrain your brain, to wake up those coordination and balance centers, and to make sure that those synaptic pathways are flowing well, because your brain is aging. It's getting older as an organ, just like our skin and our heart and our lungs and everything else gets older.
Yeah.
But again, intuitively, if they trust their feelings about how they feel.
Right.
I mean, how many times have you woke up and not felt like training?
A lot.
I mean, yeah, and then had the best training session of your life because you did it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, smart people and people that are successful in life, especially in their fitness and health, do not always follow their feelings. There is a balance. Now, I'm not going to say that we're devoid of feeling.
Right.
We need to be compassionate. We need to be in touch with our feelings, you know.
Well, intuition, I think, is a powerful force, but it's
emotional intuition too, emotional feelings.
That's right. So, like for instance,
creates passion
from a
drive,
a mundane training mindset, right? Like I can walk in there and you know, I've been lifting long enough that sometimes I have my intuition is like, man, my shoulders really bother me on this.
Right.
Like this is not the day to do my prescribed heavy triple.
Right.
I need to back it off 5-10% and then do a little bit more volume today. And that's just, you know, that's an intuition.
Right.
Usually I lean towards the side of just doing the programming anyway, as written, right? But sometimes there's that intuition that steps in. But here's the key. I have shaped that intuition over years of training, years of being coached by other people, where they told me many times, like, just do the programming.
Right.
Don't just forget about your feelings.
Well, we call that accountability.
That's accountability. And so I have honed that intuition.
Coaching.
And it, you have to keep honing it too, right? It left completely to my own devices, will end up
me too sometimes.
Leaning too much towards my feelings. And I need someone else to occasionally come in and check me to be like, hey man, just do the programming. You're fine.
Yeah. You're a perfect example of someone who has you have an analytical mind. I mean, you have a finance degree. You also have a literature degree, I think.
Right. Yeah. English. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you have this interesting balance between creativity and analytical. And what I've noticed in you over the several years I've known you is that you become more analytical, more logical, but yet you underpin that with this creative side. And so humans should advance, folks. We should advance. And so, but if you rely on nothing but your emotional reasoning, and you don't allow your logical brain and rationale and science to help underpin that, you'll be led down some rabbit holes that are really bad places, folks.
Right.
I mean, you look at the media right now and you've got, hoax here and conspiracy theories there and this here. And I'm not saying there's not some credence to some of these things, but on both ends of the spectrum. But generally, life does not have to be that polarizing.
Yeah.
A more moderate view is a much more healthy view in life, and it's a much more effective view in life too. But I think what we see in our culture right now is we see an emotional tidal wave that every single day in cyclical effect, it comes to the beaches and slams the beaches, and then it recedes. And then it slams the beaches and it recedes. And the beaches are our emotional mind.
Right.
And we have to steady ourselves and we have to recognize that is an untruth, that you should always follow your feelings, and that what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. That is an untruth too.
Right.
And that kind of leads us to the third untruth that Lukianoff and Haidt talk about in their book. The untruth of them versus us, or us versus them. That everything in life is a battle between good and evil people. Always. It's a battle against, I got to be against them.
Yeah.
They're against me. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that people that know me think that I have some conspiracy theorist philosophies. And some of that is confirmation bias. Some of that can be a little emotional in my reasoning sometimes. And some of that is just lots of cause and effect in life over the last 53 years of life.
Right.
Seeing how people actually act in real life situations.
Right.
And seeing how the world around us acts. And so I try to be careful with that. And when I start to become too conspiracy theorist oriented, I try to step down off the ledge. And I talked about it earlier. You talked about it earlier when you were talking about training. Your coach tells you, just get in and do your reps. If you want to know if you're off base, folks, go to someone who is logical and reasoning and develop accountability with them.
Right.
Have enough self-governance and a strong enough sense of constitution to go to someone and say, hey, am I way off base here?
Right. Yeah.
In my fitness and health, am I way off base here?
I know you've talked about consulting other men in your life that are more mature than you. And that's an important part of keeping yourself in check.
Right.
And, that's important. And that's an ongoing process, right?
Yeah.
You may reach a level of mastery over your faculties of logic and reason and your intuition, but it doesn't mean that you stop there, because you stop and then all of a sudden it starts to slide again. So there needs to be something to keep you in check.
Yeah, I'm generally drawn to men who are passionate, but they're passionate about their logic, reason, and science. And they have this great passion around that, but they have a generally logical, analytical mind in their foundational thinking processes. But I still believe in emotional passion about things. If you're not passionate about something, you're many times, a master of nothing. You just are kind of mediocre. And so I think passion is important in our lives. But we've got to be careful too that we don't see everything in life about those good people versus bad people.
Black and
That's
white.
a very polarizing view.
Yeah.
It's a very polarizing view to believe that everybody on the left is bad and everybody on the right is good, or everybody on the right is bad and everybody on the left is good. And I'm not talking about pure politics. I'm talking talking about lifestyle, everything.
Right.
These polarizing views that we have. And that's one of the things that the authors talk about in their book is that we've had this pervasively polarizing culture in the last, say, 50 years in our political sector. We've had this polarizing culture.
You're right.
But for your fitness and health going through this time that we're going through right now, stay off the media, man. Not everything is about bad people versus good people. And many of those things you cannot control. And your mental and emotional and physical energy spent in those areas is a waste of your resources.
Right.
Use those emotional thoughts and those mental capacities and your physical activities toward impacting the only thing that you can really impact right now. And that's your own fitness and health and helping others around you do the same.
Right. And think about, I had a young man who I was coaching that was struggling with this in March. His university was closed down. He felt like the world was ending. And what I said to him, and it was really, I was saying this to myself. He didn't know this, but I was really saying this equally.
I think we say it to ourselves.
Equally to myself as I was to him. But
yeah.
I'm like, look, take this time. Yes, things are crazy right now. We don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
And we don't know how this is going to play out. Things might get really bad. They may not be as bad as we think. We just don't know right now. Right. And that is scary. But there's not much we can do about it, right? We're already doing what we can. So take this energy and start to focus it on what you can control, which is yourself, crafting, or building your mind, continuing to keep your body strong and healthy, but then also look at how you can lead those around you. Right.
Exactly.
We all have
be a leader,
someone we can lead to. Maybe it's our children. Yeah. Maybe it's our community, the people we interact with, and to be thoughtful about how we talk about the world and what we say, and what we consume, because we can at least be models for other people and show that there is an alternative way to deal with crises.
Well, and they see it in your actions. They see it in you day to day. They see that you're still living life.
Maybe you can be that person that someone else looks up to for accountability as you look up to someone else.
Especially in our population. We're talking to what we would consider the older generation right now, the 40-plussers. We should be examples to those around us. We should be stable, firm standing examples for the people around us. I think that, when you take these three principles these authors have kind of elucidated, this concept of what doesn't kill you makes you weaker as an untruth, how can you combat that? Strength train. Do the hard. If you don't have access to a gym right now, you can go out and run wind sprints. You can go out and do hills. You can go out and do something hard. Do something that's going to stress your body. It's going to stress. Maybe it stresses your mind and emotions.
Right.
Maybe do something that you've been wanting to do. Stress your mind more. Challenge your mind. Take a class, online class, or learn something new. But stimulate stress in a healthy manner and adapt to it and see how the real truth is. And the real truth is what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
That's right.
The second thing is on, the untruth of, always trust your feelings, be accountable to someone around you. And in some ways, I'm not going to say become an isolationist, but protect what you let into your emotional mind. Right now. Protect, if you see something on TV that is going to throw you against the tidal wave and you're not ready for it, turn it off.
Yeah.
Turn it off.
There are a lot of different agendas around what messaging is put out in the world.
Right.
Some of it's propaganda, some of it's just salesmanship, some of it's, coordinated marketing. Some of it is popular media that's just mirroring society. There's a whole bunch of different motivations for that is put out into your ear holes. But ultimately, you have control over what you let in.
Right. Letting good stuff like this.
Be conscious. Yeah, that's right. So listen to 40 Fit Radio. And turn off 1080 AM. Whatever. Yeah.
And then the last thing is just talking about this, and do stuff for your emotional well-being too. Meditate. Just think about good things, make a list. We talked about this in a previous podcast, how to survive, how to be positive with COVID-19, We talked about just making a list of the positives, the pros in your life and just meditating on those things and, be around your loved ones and reach out to others, be a benefactor to others, be, be benevolent to others and help others around you. That sure helps put our own plight in perspective sometimes. And so then the last thing is recognize that not everything in life is about good people versus bad people. Not everything in life is about us versus them. And just take more of a middle ground on some of this stuff and recognize that there are some forces within our society right now that want bad things to happen. And there are some forces in our society that want better things to happen. And you just have to decide where you want to be in that spectrum. I'm a believer in a balanced viewpoint in life. I do believe that there are bad people and evil people in life that want to do bad things. But I try to believe the best in someone first until they prove me wrong.
Right.
And then you've got to do what you got to do. And so balance your thinking about others, and again, control what you let into your mind through this process and build that strong mind.
Right. I'm doing this online Great Books program, and we're working our way through the Greek tragedians right now. We just read Aeschylus, and we had our seminar last night. We're talking about, it's just a bunch of drama and tragedy that is really no different from Game of Thrones or any of the popular media today. It hasn't really changed at all. It's funny how alike it is. We think it's all. We think all this.
We
stuff
want to think we're this advanced civil culture.
Yeah, we think this is all ancient fuddy-duddy literature, and it's just the same exact characters and topics, and it's funny in that way. But as part of this, I've started to read a little bit more philosophy, and I'm still very much a novice student in this stuff. But one of the things that has really taken hold in my mind that I'm wrestling with right now is Aristotle and his ethics. And I won't pretend to understand 10% of what Aristotle was saying, but one thing that has really stuck with me is that the concept of happiness that Aristotle spoke of, he didn't use the word happiness because he was Greek, obviously. The word he used was eudaimonia, which is not happiness in the sense that we use it in English. It was more of, it's an activity. It's a thing that you do. It's a thing that you pursue. And for Aristotle, pursuit of the highest goods in life, the highest good, virtues, excellence for him, was happiness. It's the pursuit of it, the execution of virtue, or the pursuit of acquiring virtue was the thing. In other words, action. He had a bias for action in life. And that has stuck with me in that we talk about safety and happiness and our sort of this idea that we're progressing towards something better as humanity. That's kind of like a lot of these things we've talked about are predicated on these ideas. And I don't think that happiness is a thing that you can arrive at or a thing that you can have. It's not a state of contentment. Right? It's not like being full after a big meal. It's a pursuit. It's a thing that you actively practice.
It's a struggle.
Right? It's a struggle, right? And so it's there really is no place to get to. In my mind, it's more of the pursuit of the thing.
Yeah. And I think again, guys out there, our number one goal in 40 Fit Radio is to provide content that makes sense, that's logical, that's science-based, that has reason to it.
I don't know if I made any sense today.
Yeah, you made good sense today. I mean, I think what we're basically saying, folks,
I tried.
You make a lot of sense, Trent. And I think what we're basically saying, guys, is have a strong mind, be actionable about what you're doing through this, control your emotions, make sure that you're emotionally sound and you're using reason, and also recognize that not everything in life is about bad people versus good people. If you'll just make sure that you don't have those three untruths operating, I think we all have those untruths operating a little bit in us at times, at different times in our lives, when we might feel weaker. But, kind of gird your loins right now and just buckle down in this thing and reach out to others, and also recognize that the best thing we can do is be self-governing and be self-responsible in our actions and help others along the way. So, hey, thanks, guys, for joining 40 Fit Radio, and thanks for being part of the 40 Fit Nation. If you want to reach out to us via email, go to info@40fit.com. If you want to get us on Instagram, Trent's @Marmalade Cream. I'm @Dr. Deaton. And lastly, if you want to check us out online, it would be 40fit.com, and you can go to the 40 Fit Radio tab. And you can also get us on Facebook at the 40 Fit Nation Facebook group. I wanted to say this, though. It was really cool. Trent and I got an email day before yesterday from a guy in Scotland who is listening to our podcast. And when you sign up for our newsletter, you have to give us your zip code because we want to know kind of what part of the country you're from or what part of the area. And he said, I don't have a zip code. So Trent fixed that so that we could get him access to the newsletter. But that was really cool to have a guy from Scotland because what we don't realize, we know, but sometimes we just don't think about it. We have people listening from all over the world.
Yeah, how cool is that?
Yeah,
how cool is that?
So, hey guys, thanks for joining us, and have a great day.